Welcome back to the IoT Podcast. I'm your host, Tom White. Every week we are joined by the biggest names in IoT to unravel the trends, misconceptions and predictions for the Internet of Things. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're watching or listening on and turn on that notification bell so you're never out of the loop. In today's episode, I'm joined by serial entrepreneur, investor and author Matt Oberdorfer, founder and CEO of Embassy of Things and the Industrial Integration Platform. We'll be breaking down today, guys, the common challenges and pitfalls of industrial IoT projects and what we need to do about it. We'll also be finishing the episode with touching on the potential of generative AI in the industrial sector. Trust me, this one's not to be missed. Before we get into the episode, shout out to one of our sponsors today, 5E Tech. 5E Tech are specialists in finding people who make technology a force for good in the world. They bridge the gap between talent and deep tech businesses around the globe. Click the link in the description to find out more. Before we get into the episode, shout out to one of our sponsors, IoT Tech Expo Europe, the leading event for digital twins, IoT and digital transformation. Hi Matt, welcome to the IoT Podcast.
Hey Tom, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. No stranger to podcasts, no stranger to IoT, but a stranger to our podcast. So perhaps you might be able to start by introducing yourself, Matt, who you are and what your background is and what brought you into this wonderful, crazy world of IoT.
My name is Matt Oberdorfer. I'm the CEO of a company called Embassy of Things, and for IoT for short, most people refer to it as IoT. IoT is a company that is basically doing industrial software, specifically for IoT, industrial IoT, to get data in and out of operational technology environments for oil and gas companies, energy companies, renewable energy companies, manufacturing companies, transportation companies, and so on, and then make that data available to analytics and machine learning and AI systems in the cloud so that you can derive analytical insights that will help to, basically improve the production output volumes, cost savings, net carbon footprint, and sustainability for the industrial equipment. So it's kind of an end-to-end type of industrial software solution. Background-wise, as you probably can hear from my slight accent, even though I'm based in California, United States, I'm originally from Germany, and studied computer science in Stuttgart there. So dove deep into AI back then, into neural networks, into everything that has to do with recurring networks, and also kind of combining them into multiple layers and all that kind of good stuff. And then since then, I've been starting companies. I think this is my 7th startup. So that's it for a short intro.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a lot to take in, right? I think your business right now, IoT, is really at the forefront of taking IoT data and using it with AI, right? AI, generative AI, takes a lot of hype away from IoT at the moment, which some might say is a good thing. But I think understanding and using that data and then being able to load that up through prompt engineering and other mechanisms into AI is absolutely critical at the moment. So really, really interesting, and definitely going to get into that in today's podcast. But your background is also fantastic, Matt. 7th startup. I mean, just to ask you that, you must love creating something from scratch to be on your 7th one. Is that the reason why you do it?
So a couple of things about this. I've been when I was in school, when I was studying computer science at the university, I always said to my classmates, I said, look, one time I'm going to go to Silicon Valley, raise millions of dollars and have a startup. And they were like, yeah, okay, sure. You're going to do that. Right. So for me, it was not just something that, happened at some point. I always wanted to do it. I had my first startup back in Germany, basically out of my parents' house, who were getting really concerned about the fact that people were sending me checks and money in the mail for some sort of thing that I programmed. And my mom was like, why are you getting all this money? So for me, the startup kind of, life has basically two things that are very important to me. One is you're much more in control of your own destiny. So why work for anyone else if you can actually do your own thing? The risk, everybody typically says, well, startups is risky because you can lose your job and, startups don't go anywhere. But the same is true if you work for a big company. You can also get laid off. Even the biggest companies, even the biggest in the world, just in the last, few weeks, laid off thousands and thousands of people, good people. And that's it, right? So there's always a risk to it. And then secondly, what you just said is creating something new, right? If you want to really be able to innovate fast, then a startup is the only way, in my opinion. Because if you're in a bigger company, you're like on a cruise ship or like a big, transportation vessel in the ocean. It goes very slow. It has a very particular destination that the captain, which is the CEO of the big company, going to set with the shareholders in, as a focus, and you are doing something on that ship, right? If you're a startup, you're like a little speedboat. You can zoom around, you go from one side to the other side, and you can figure out that it's called pivoting. If you know the book Lean Startup from Reese, right? So, failing fast, that's not what you do when you're actually in a big company. In a small company, you can do these things. And it's important to set your sight on something that is a overlooked problem, right? So that the big companies, they cannot fill this problem really fast. They don't have the manpower, the knowledge, expertise, or whatever. And so if you're smart as a startup, you can actually go find these, kind of overlooked problems and build something that they can actually use, and ultimately then, get acquired or sell the solution to them, and so on and so forth. So for me, that's really, what the startup is about. As soon as the company becomes bigger and goes into this concept of, we are becoming a big ship that has to kind of steadily move and we cannot shake it anymore, then it's time for me to kind of move on. So I like to work with a small amount of people that can actually think fast, move fast, and innovate.
It's interesting to say that, because we recently today in our business, we were doing a personality types talk, right? It's from the classic book by, I think, Thomas Erickson. And a lot of entrepreneurs, are quite red and yellow as a personality type, right? And I can completely understand where you're coming from. It's being able to affect change, make a difference, do something quickly, and be agile enough to make it happen. And I think sometimes, you get weighed down by agreeing and answering to stakeholders, actually, and really, what are you actually doing this for? How quickly can you turn? And then it becomes difficult. I think the phrase is being a first miler, isn't it? Getting things off the ground, making it happen, and getting interest in that. And I think we're probably cut from a very similar cloth, Matt, actually, when it comes to that. It's also my mindset, so I agree a lot with you on that, actually. And it's nice that you've taken that entrepreneurial mindset from technology and really focused it in Embassy of Things. And maybe to get onto that, actually. So the business primarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're involved in industrial data, so very much the IIoT market. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, in our business, and I think, the focus also for my company, and this is not just for my company, but in general in IoT. Like if you look at IoT in general, right, you have consumers, you have all the devices that people have, around their wrist, like my smartwatch here that measures everything, my heart rate and all that stuff, to phone tracking and other stuff, right? So there's another world out there that you have billions or even trillions of sensors that have been put in place over the last 4 decades to measure the tubing pressure of an oil pump that sits somewhere in a deserted area, in East Texas, right? And has been measuring that tubing pressure every minute, right? typically that data does not even go anywhere because it's just stored locally for historical reasons, so that if anything goes ever wrong, they can actually look into that thing and say, we know what happened and why it kind of blew up, right? So you have all these trillions of sensors for all the energy, power plants, utility businesses, oil wells, all of the energy type of industrial systems, as well as manufacturing, same thing, right? So if all this data, and they are now able for the first time to use the power of AI version 2.0, which we can talk about what that means a little bit later, to actually do preemptive maintenance and predict when the systems are going to fail. Right? The old world, the old school kind of way is you do reactive maintenance. Like, oops, something just happened. And if we are good at it, you have an AI or machine learning or just an analytic system that can detect anomalies, so that you don't have to see, okay, well, there's something is burning there on the horizon, right? You actually see in the local SCADA system that something is wrong. But now with the new type of technology and new type of AI, you can actually predict how long a industrial system is going to run before it fails, and you can predict what the reason is for the failure, and you can also get how the certainty index. How certain is it that this is going to happen in 3 months from now, right? So that changes the game, right? But that comes back to IoT, and specifically in the industrial IoT, right? So each of these sensors have to have an Internet of Things address. Each of these, sensors has to be able to, translate or migrate the data, transform the data into the cloud, because AI always requires a lot of computing power and storage to be able to train an AI model. Like the training process is very compute intensive and requires basically historical data over the last 10 years for thousands and thousands of, let's say, oil wells or wind turbines or whatever. Only if you have that power, and you have only this power in the cloud, you can actually train the model, right? Now, that means you have to get the data from, the field into the cloud, and you have to then take the insights that are generated by this AI back, to where it matters, to the operators that operate actually the equipment, right? So that all, end to end is really what industrial IoT kind of stands for. It's kind of the delivery, the acquisition and delivery of industrial sensor data into the cloud, being able to process, analyze it, and then deliver the data of the insights back to the people actually that can do something about it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic and critical, really, to have this in play.
Right.
And I guess the burning question that I have, and maybe others listening and watching this now, is why is it that consumer electronics, we speak about our watches and our smart rings, etc. Why is it that that's so far further advanced quicker than it is an industrial landscape?
Oh, that's a very good question. So first of all, it's a very good question. First of all, if you talk to anyone in the industrial world, they always refer to the speed of how fast the industrial world is moving is like a glacier, right? It's like a glacier. It moves extremely slow, right? The reason, there's a plethora of reasons why that is the case. But basically, the main reason is there's a divide between what's called OT and IT. And this divide that separates, even in this divide is happening in one, or in every single company that actually is involved in this. OT is an operational network and operational technology, OT, operational technology, that is really run by the operators that are measured and held accountable for operating the industrial equipment, right? So they have their own IT people, that actually connect the sensors and, do the, acquisition of the data and their own systems. However, this world is disconnected from the IT world completely for security reasons. Now, in the same company, you have IT systems like SAP, MES system in manufacturing, EAM systems in energy, right? They hold asset information about the same stuff like an oil well, but it's in a different network, right? So now you have two different parts of a company, and they basically typically don't talk much to each other because they have very different objectives. The ones on the OT side really have to keep the equipment running. The ones on the IT side, they want to do business decisions and predictions for for production volumes and stuff like that. And there's a cartoon that a friend of mine who's in one of the oil and gas companies always shows when we are on stage presenting at conferences, which is you have two cavemen that pulling a cart behind them, and the cart has unfortunately wheels that are basically squares, like they are not round, right? And there's another caveman that is coming from the side that want to hand them some round wheels and says, hey, and they're like, we are too busy. They're like waving to go away and say, go away. We're too busy pulling this cart, right? And that's what causes literally why this is one of the key things, why innovation and the adoption of new technologies is so slow, like a glacier, right? Because even if there's someone who invents the wheel, like literally, and hands them to those guys, they are so busy and focused on keeping the lights on, running the equipment, making sure that it's all working, that they are like, no, not right now. We are too busy doing that. So what I said, in one of our previous talks that we had in Houston, I think about a month ago, is now with the availability and the power of AI 2.0, the glaciers are moving faster, right? So there's the glacier of manufacturing and the glacier of oil and gas, and typically oil and gas is kind of even the slower glacier compared to the industrial IoT in manufacturing. But now with kind of this kind of new, let's say, power of AI 2.0, the glaciers have started to kind of speed up. They are still glaciers. They are still extremely slow. So it will take years for them to really adopt it. But there's a lot of movement. There's so many of these companies that have started serious projects, not just pet projects that do some kindergarten work, to say, oh yeah, we are also doing this, but really focusing, with the CEOs, not only approval, but focus of CEO and shareholder on making some serious advancements, towards goals that lead to it. And I mean, some of these big oil and gas companies, even BP, right? British Petrol, right? They have set their net zero, carbon footprint, zero carbon emissions, as a corporate goal they want to achieve, right? So how are they going to achieve that? Only with adoption of industrial IoT technology and AI, right? Because ultimately, if you want to predict failures, emissions, avoidance, and all that stuff, you need some serious, power. It's not, you cannot achieve that by doing what you have been doing for the last 40 years. It's not going to happen. So
yeah, it's a fantastic answer, and sadly one I've heard before. At the speed of innovation really is quite slow. I remember my own personal story. We in the recruiting business that I owned in IoT, we did some work with a packaging company in Switzerland, and they were very famous actually for being one of the largest manufacturers of packaging in the world. Family-run business. A lot of big Swiss businesses are, and they created a whole new department from scratch and built it and took the people in and did it, and they were quite visionary actually to do that at that time, because I think they had a lot of pushback with stakeholders, as shareholders in the business as to why this was important. But it transformed their business, in several ways. And I think that analogy there with the cartoon with the wheels, I think is so perfect.
Right.
You can get so blinded, can't you, by what you're doing without actually taking a step back to actually take stock. And so I think that's a really interesting point. One of the phrases you used in our discovery call that we did, and I love this phrase, and I'm going to bring it up, is you said, you can't boil the ocean. And I wondered if you could explain what that means in why industrial IoT projects potentially fail sometimes by people boiling the ocean.
Right.
Could you explain that?
Oh, absolutely. That is a typical, I would say it's a typical startup problem. What I mean with this is, let's say you take a company and they're like, okay, we want to figure out how we can use the sensor data in our company to predict, failures in the future and blah, 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 all that stuff, right? We want to forecast production volume. We want to avoid any kind of costs that come from downtime. So what typically happens is there's two major problems that can happen. The first one is they start and say, okay, well, we want to build a solution, but the solution that we're going to build should be able to fulfill all the use cases we have in the company, right? So that's the boil the ocean approach. And what happens then is they bring in some external consultants and they do discovery after discovery after discovery with all different organizations inside a company. And I call it death by discovery. They create a list that's so long that everybody, their grandmother, their dog, the flea on the dog can say, oh, I have another use case we can do. And so they end up with a list that is a mile long of use cases that they can now be doing. And now, as a follow-up, they're like, okay, now we want to build a solution which is able to basically solve all these problems, right? That is almost certainly a complete recipe for failure, because it's kind of like you want to build a house or a building. Let's say you want to build a building. The building, should be a hospital, but also a hotel, and maybe also a business building and an apartment building at the same time. Yeah, and maybe there should be also, a landing place for multiple helicopters in it, and it should be underwater. Right? It's like it's kind of like you want to build something that fulfills all the stuff. Right now, you could say, well, let's first build a platform that does all of it, and then we build something on top of it. Anyway, it becomes a very cumbersome situation where when they start to actually build the whole thing, it will take them at least a year, probably 2 years to do this. Now, during these 2 years, you will have all these people involved that you did the discovery sessions with and then have use cases. And this means the entire company is involved. And there will be a lot of inner political struggles. A lot of other stuff is going to happen. In 2 years, this company is going to have different leaders, different this, different that. So by the end of the whole thing, you might have wasted a lot of money, involved a lot of people. And at some point, the shareholders or the CEO says, so show me what works. And nothing works because they are still working on building the entire big thing, right? So boiling the ocean is typically leads to a completely overladen project that almost certainly fails because it cannot be really materialized or implemented that way. The second, even worse way is to say, we'll first actually build an industrial data lake for industrial IoT data, but we are not talking to anyone that has any use case whatsoever. We will do that after we build the lake, the data lake, right? That's even more a recipe for failure because you're building in something without having any user involved at all, right? And then you probably bring in some data, and then you have some users look at it, and most of them look at the stuff and it's like, that's like a data swarm. It's not even data lake. And we can't really use any of this data as you kind of bring it in, because we have all this other data from these other systems that we have to, kind of commingle it with, or, sync it up, or have some sort of metadata augmentation. So, and you guys haven't thought about it, so not usable to us at all. So you have now suddenly a data lake that gets all the data in the world from all these systems, and nobody is using it at all. So it's kind of an abandoned data lake. That's also, I've seen this many times too. So these are two approaches that almost certainly fail.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to recognize how people have failed, what companies have done wrong, and clearly we're going to get onto it, how you can change that, right? And how you can fix that. But I guess the other aspect of failure perhaps is if someone fails, or if a company fails in their IoT digital transformation project, they're less likely to try again, which is actually probably a bad thing as well, right? Because they've done it, they've wasted money.
Typically they have no chance to try again, because in almost all the cases that I saw, that whoever was in charge either left the company or was asked to leave the company, right? It's very simple, because if you lead a large corporate project and you have probably a couple of chances to make it work, but if after 2 years this thing is still delivering no business value, then it will be it's a limiting move to your career, right? So what people really should think about if they actually start off a project is they should pick one use case and make that work really fast. If you can show business value within, let's say, 2 months, even if it's just a little cost savings, you have credibility. You have shown, we can do this. We can implement, a solution that actually has real benefits for our company. And then you can actually add on another use case and another use case, another use case. So starting without use cases is bad. You trying to solve all use cases is also bad. But instead, what really is important is to select a use case that has real money attached to it, not just some, made up use case, but has real users, real money in attached to it. Involve them from the beginning. You never start ever with having no users involved, right? And make sure that you can do this project in a reasonably short time period. If you can pull this, off and you make it happen, you implement it, you're going to be the hero. They're going to be the hero. Or the users will be your, best, proponent. They will say, hey, yeah, it's working, right? And everybody else in the company is like, I want this too, right? If these guys get it and it works, I want this too, right? So you want to get to that point where people point to a project that was successful and say, in the next iteration, we want to be part of it. We want to be, the next use case you guys do.
Thanks again for IoT Tech Expo Europe for sponsoring today's episode. IoT Tech Expo Europe brings together Europe's brightest minds to talk about cutting-edge technology in one place. Experience top-level discussions, innovative IoT innovations and strategies. Mark your calendars for the 26th and 27th of September 2023 when IoT Tech Expo Europe returns to the vibrant city of Amsterdam. I'll be there, will you? Get your tickets at iottechexpo.com/Europe. The link will be in the description.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And, just to recap then for our viewers and listeners. So focus on a clearly defined digital strategy, a specific area, start with something that you could do quickly to show real value as quickly as possible.
Yes, and you mentioned something really important. What the digital strategy, right? So underneath it all, there has to be, you have to think about the use case. You have to have a strategy, and that strategy has to be clear. The strategy should be able to include also other use cases in the future. It's not like, you just focus on one thing and that's it. very important is that the company understands that the strategic part is key. Like, I mean, it's kind of like the Einstein quote where, he said, if I would have, I think, 10 minutes, I would use 9 minutes to think about the problem and 1 minute about the solution. It's kind of, you want to think about your strategy and about the use case and about all of this, how you start, how long it's going to take, and optimize everything before you even get started, right? That's key. Industrial strategy is absolute key.
Yeah, I mean, real actionable take home advice for people here listening, right? You're starting with the why, very famous phrase by Simon Sinek, but it's appropriate here as well. Why are you doing this, and what are you trying to solve? And think about it a lot. It's fantastic, Matt. Thank you for sharing those insights. I wanted to move on, if I could, and talk about a little bit about industrial IoT and AI. So I think at the start of the podcast, we kind of spoke a little bit about the kind of makeup of IoT and what you do as a business, and the fact that you link IoT and AI. Now, clearly, there is a lot of hype at the moment, although it seems to have petered off a little bit, but it's still quite high, about generative AI, ChatGPT, Bard, various other initiatives that are coming out there at the moment. Right. This technology has a lot of potential for the industrial landscape. Could you just talk about that a little bit further?
Yes. So let's just set things apart and separate a couple of things that are really important to understand. So I talked already about AI version 1.0 and 2.0, and for me, the difference between 1.0 and 2.0 from a use case and usability perspective, what you can get out of it, is the following. Before technology like ChatGPT, AI is basically able to get trained with historical data and be able to do anomaly detection. So you basically, let's say you have some system, a network or, phones or whatever it is, and you can train an AI to listen to it and say something is wrong, right? You can use that in cybersecurity. You can use it for bandwidth control. You can use it for a lot of stuff, right? It's anomaly detection, right? So it can say something is wrong because it doesn't look right. With the AI version 2.0, you can train the AI again with historical data, but now you can predict the future, right? So the generative part is you create answers to questions that have not been answered before, right? So let me explain what that means first in ChatGPT, and then what it actually means for industrial IoT, because it's very different. So when you use ChatGPT, you can, ask a question and you get a text-based answer, right? And you can say, any type of question, you get an answer, whether it's health or legal, or you can even generate code with it. These answers are generated. They don't exist. It's not like ChatGPT goes out and looks it up on the internet and then, shows it to you like a Google search. No, it actually creates that content, and it puts things together like a human brain would, right? It really literally creates an answer for your question. Even if nobody has ever asked that question before, it will generate actually an answer. And internally, it will also generate a certainty index that will internally show how certain ChatGPT is that the answer is correct. So it could give you an answer and say, internally, I think it's like 30% correct. But ChatGPT doesn't show you that, but it does create this new content. Now, second part is that is not really usable for IoT per se, because in industrial sensors as well as non-industrial sensors don't create text; they create numbers, right? Even audios, an audio stream is on numbers, right? So you cannot use a large language model to actually, and apply it for, let's say, a string of floating point data that comes from a sensor that measures temperature and pressure and all that stuff. However, there are generative pre-trained transformer models that are not large language models. They exist today that basically can do the same thing like ChatGPT does for text. They can do that for floating point data. And what that means is you basically can train a model on time series data, and then you can ask this model questions. But the questions are more like, show me when is this device going to run into problems, right? And it will tell you an answer. It will say, well, this device is going to fail in 2 months, right? This oil pump will, stop working in 3 weeks. And you can say, why? Right? So what it internally does is, and this is exactly how ChatGPT works on a text basis, internally it creates basically, it simulates the future of this device. So it basically, literally generates the future output of sensor data, and it then simulates, by simulating the future, it will know, when it will run into a problem, right? And it can tell you then also what the problem is going to be. And that's a big game changer, because if you know, for instance, that let's say you have 10,000 industrial assets, and these are the 100 assets that are going to run into problems in 3 weeks from now. You already know what type of problems they're going to be. You can optimize everything. You can even start ordering parts today, right? Because even if it's not 100 of them that are going to fail because of that thing, maybe it's only 90, and it's not 100% certain that all of them fail. You can optimize what people do that actually maintain those assets, what they should focus on. You can do much more than just preemptive maintenance. It's a complete game changer of what this AI can do for you, right? So so taking it back to ChatGPT, so with industrial IoT or IoT in general, that type of technology that actually uses the same way of how ChatGPT is using language and text-based content, instead using floating point data and sensor data, will allow you to kind of open up all this new stuff, and the power of that type of AI, which I call AI 2.0, in our future. And we are just at the beginning. I mean, this thing is so new that I think in the next 5 to 10 years, again, glacier, for industrial IoT, it's not like this is not going to happen in 2023, even though it could, even the technology will be there. The adoption rate will be much slower in the industrial world, but it's a game changer. And I think that specifically given the fact that the industrial companies have these goals to actually go to, cut down on emissions and go be more sustainable and so on, that puts additional pressure on those companies internally and externally to actually embrace this new technology.
I think that really is the future, isn't it, Matt? As you say, this AI 2.0, based upon real-time information, floating point data, as you say, it's a game changer, actually, isn't it, to be able to do that? And the pace of innovation at the moment with AI is quite rapid. So I think it's a remarkable time, and an interesting time for people in IoT to see this coalition of IoT and AI coming together. Actually, it'll be interesting to see where we are in 5-10 years time. But of course,
inseparable. This is going to be just one thing. I mean, one of the other things is very important when corporations, and specifically in the industrial world, say, oh, we should do something with AI, right? AI will be 20% of the problem. The IoT part will be 80% of the problem, right? So it's very, very important. In my previous life, I was, advising a lot of industrial startups that were really focused on big data analytics and AI. And it's easy to get into the door with big companies like, oh, we have this cool AI stuff. But if there's no way to actually get data into the AI, right, out of these operational environments, it will never ever go into production, right? So I always say the hell of POCs, everything that fails, the POC hell is plastered with successful POCs that never made it. They all went to hell because they only focused on the AI and analytics part, and they never actually thought about, oh, we need actually industrial IoT to bring the data in. That's a completely overlooked problem. So
that's the beauty of looking back at proof of concepts, right? And being able to learn from those that went to hell,
yeah,
so that yours doesn't. Hopefully,
yeah.
that's the aim, right? Matt, it's been excellent having you on the podcast. I think truly your insights are fantastic. I wanted to talk a little bit before we wrap up about your book as well. So you've got a book out, The Trailblazer's Guide to Industrial IoT. Where can people find it? I assume it's on Amazon. People can find it online.
Yeah, so the book Trailblazer's Guide to Industrial IoT is going to be available on Amazon. The publish date is August 22nd. Okay. And this book is very different, I think, from any industrial IoT book, because it's an answer to the question, why do these industrial IoT projects fail? And what I try to do is to actually explain it in a way that's a little bit entertaining. What I mean with that is, if you are looking for a book that explains to you what is MQTT and how does it help to get data from PLCs to, let's say, SCADA systems or OPC servers, or from OPC UA servers to data historians or whatever, that is not the book, that you're looking for, or any of these things. This book is actually a novel. It has a plot. It has a storyline that starts with a gentleman that sits in an office building and gets a message on his whiteboard. It's literally on his whiteboard. It says, "Hey, what about this industrial IoT and AI? Is that something that we can use to improve our company, save the planet, save the world?" And so in this book, he goes onto a journey to find out how they can use it inside his own company. And of course, there's another department that has the same idea, and so there's two competing departments, right? And so if you have a protagonist, you have an antagonist, you have basically people that have inner political fights. You have projects that almost fail because of several reasons: technology, process, people, right? So it tries to reflect all the situations that I've seen in real life in a way that is very close to that real life, but at the same time it also educates. So we dive into what is AI, what is AI version 1.0, what's AI version 2.0. So it educates as well. So the goal was to be entertaining and educational at the same time.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, that's excellent. Well, can't wait to see that being released. We'll have to hook up a couple of free copies to some of the IoT podcast
Absolutely.
listeners as well.
Absolutely.
Perhaps. Yeah. So we'll get the link in the comments for that. Matt, so as we come to wrap up the podcast, we always ask the same questions to some of our guests, and I'll ask the same one to you. And I think I might know the answer, but I'll let you talk about it. What would be your prediction for IoT in 2023? If something could come into fruition and be widespread in IoT this year in particular, what would that be and why?
Well, I do believe that these that what I just talked about, the industrial IoT 2.0, that these models are going to become much more, let's say, they become much more public. People talk about ChatGPT and all that stuff, but that in itself is not that applicable. But it will become very clear how much value similar models for time series data and IoT will be able to do. That will become very clear. Now, the adoption I think it will be first adopted directly by companies that are consumer facing, not by industrials. Let's say, for instance, you take, there's tons of companies now that do personal medicine where you can sign up, you get your blood, work done every like 2 months or whatever. Let's say you do sign up for these things and you use AI and you take in the numbers, right? This is all numbers. And you say, well, this person's, heart is going to fail, or this is going to fail in the next 3 months or next 2 years or whatever. So you can predict things. There are a couple of companies that are trying to do this already by identifying markers in the DNA in your blood. But I think all the personalized stuff will be the first adopters. And then the industrial world will come in later. But I think that these number-based generative pre-trained transformer models will become, it will become very clear what the power is for us.
I can't wait to see that come out and to do a podcast about it in the future. Thank you, Matt. And lastly, a couple of quick fire questions for you. What is a quote that you live by in life? You've named some great quotes and some great sayings today on the podcast, but what's some words that you live by?
What I said earlier, for me, it's always think about the problem. Einstein quote: think about the problem for 9 minutes, and then about the solution for 1 minute. For me, this is key. It's so important to not just actually get started, but really, understand deeply what it all entails and have the right people involved to do this. So I would say that's one that comes immediately to mind.
I like that one a lot personally as well, and we'll stick that in the comments so people can see it. But I think a lot of people would do well to remember that. And a final question would be: if you could have any IoT powered gadget at home, what would it be and why?
Any IoT powered gadget would be basically a IoT pet friend, right? So if you have pets at home, okay, and you want to, let's say, go on vacation, or you go at work to work or whatever, if there's a way for having a pet companion that you can also remotely control and that the pet can see you. I know there's a couple of these projects in the works, like Amazon has one that just became available, but it's, I think, $3,000, where you actually, your pet can see you on the screen and so. But there's a couple of these projects in the works. But if you could be basically present for your pets and interact with your pets while you are away, that would be extremely valuable, I think, and a lot of people will love it. So that would be immediately coming.
That's a nice one. I feel like this is business number 8 coming on, perhaps, Matt, right? At some point, what a fantastic suggestion. Yeah, I can definitely see the value in that, absolutely. Matt, it's been lovely having you on the IoT podcast. You've been an excellent guest with some fantastic insights. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you, Tom. It was a pleasure.
Thank you once again to IoT Tech Expo Europe for sponsoring today's episode. Once again, please get your tickets. The link will be in the description.
Thanks for tuning in to the IoT podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're on. See you next week for more IoT talks and tales.